Thank you for joining us, Jason Campbell. I appreciate it. And you're following on the news on ongoing peace talks and currently stalled because they will resume later next year. But the most important issue for this talks, the ceasefire is not established, which should have been, but is postponed to the end of maybe reaching a political solution. What's your thoughts about Taliban using violence and also at the same time negotiating with Afghan government?
Well, I think it's important to remember a fundamental truth here is that for the Taliban, their ability to carry out targeted violence is their primary source of leverage. So I think in terms of their negotiating position, I think they feel that it's always important to remind not only those negotiators on the Afghan government side, but also the Afghan public that they're capable of carrying out violent attacks if they feel that their interests are not being adequately discussed either through negotiations or through their ability to find other ways to take over aspects of Afghan society. And I think that if you weigh the positions from the Afghan government side and the Taliban side, what the Taliban have not done yet is had to articulate how they would perform as a political actor in a peaceful Afghanistan. And I think until such time that they're put in a position to do that, they'll continue to be able to rely on violence as a means of directing the negotiations in a direction that they would prefer.
There's a growing concerns on these latest attacks, which they use the magnetic bombing of vehicles and targeting media, targeting religious leaders, parliament members, and today there was another attack. What's your thoughts about it? How this other existing militant groups abusing the situation and their advantage, also continuing this violence in Afghanistan?
Yes, and I think that's an important aspect of the intimidation that both the Taliban and other terrorist organizations are trying to inflict on Afghan society. The Taliban, from their early existence, has targeted religious leaders and any other prominent, influential individuals who they felt were in competition. They were in competition with for influence. So, this tactic, this use of the magnetic bombs is not new, but I think you're seeing increased use of it because it is targeted again against those aspects of society that they are not conforming to their interests or to their outlook. And as a result, you're seeing more moderate politicians, journalists, and the like being very specifically targeted to try to, again, intimidate those other voices that remain to, if not come over to the Taliban's way of thinking, then to at least silence voices and allow them to proceed.
Taliban visited Islamabad, and officials in Pakistan, they are saying that Taliban are not the only group responsible for reduction of the violence. So what do you think, who's the main aggressor here? Are they referring to Afghan National Army or international forces? What's your thoughts about it?
Well, look, I mean, it is still a conflict in Afghanistan. So you certainly do have, obviously, the Afghan National Security Forces, in a much lesser degree, US and coalition forces carrying out targeted attacks. But I think in terms of the what you could call the politically motivated violence, I think that still lies with the Taliban and, as you said earlier, some other organizations perhaps with different agendas mimicking some of the Taliban's tactics towards their own ends. So there's always going to be that argument that there are two sides here that are engaged in violence. What we have not seen yet from the Taliban side is a willingness to, again, get to, as you said earlier, a firm ceasefire and talks that do not take place under the guise of persistent violence. And I think we have absolutely heard that from the side of the Afghan government and the US accordingly.
Yeah, with the troops reduction decision and 2,500 coming back home, and the number of troops are also like going to zero by May 2021. How do you assess U.S. Military presence in support of Afghanistan and how they can help to decrease the level of violence in Afghanistan?
It's a point of frustration for me watching over the last couple of years as the United States has increasingly divorced its military presence in Afghanistan from concrete steps in the peace process. I think we have to remember that in terms of the Taliban's priorities, number one has always been the reduction of US and allied forces in Afghanistan. And you go back to December of 2018 when President Trump in front of the White House announced without informing many US government agencies that the US would reduce half its footprint in Afghanistan. If you're going to tell your adversary you're going to give them what they want, essentially for free, I think you should then expect that they're not going to be as cooperative as you'd like them to be at the negotiating table. And as we move forward here with what will be a very small and focused footprint in Kabul, that increasingly hurts the leverage of both the United States and the Afghan government. And one of my big concerns here is the United States goes through a political transition here in January. The limited options that even a Biden government will have to alter or change some of the policies that have been enacted here over the last year and a half or so.
I partially answered the next question. Many Congress members also argue that they are not pro-open war in Afghanistan, and as you mentioned, also Biden has been looking, when he was a vice president, for minimum presence in Afghanistan and more of counterinsurgency mission. What about other insurgent groups? Do you think still Afghanistan is not prone to go back? What happened? What was the situation in 2001? Because Taliban was supposed to cut ties with these terrorist groups, according to the agreement, but they didn't.
No, you're absolutely right. Evidence suggests that the Taliban have not made any real substantial breaks with other organizations that they've had long-held relationships with. And the United States' ability to address this is going to decrease here in the coming weeks and months. What remains untested thus far is this sort of theory that the United States could maintain some level of a focused counterterrorism operation in Afghanistan that would again still act as a source of leverage over the Taliban and other groups. What also remains to be seen is the degree to which the Afghan government or the pro-government Afghan groups can come together and remain together around an agenda for peace. And what you don't want to see, obviously, is the Taliban being able to sort of negotiate one-on-one with some of the regional and other influential power brokers in Afghanistan, because I think that would certainly, if not result in the pre-2001 setting, it certainly gets you uncomfortably close to that in the months and years to come.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Jason, for all this excellent information. It's great.